Hello and welcome to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is to take my brain out of the mode of background work and move into the process of writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first. And the second reason is just to allow you, the viewer, who have graciously given up your time to come by and watch this crazy rambling that I put on every week. So that is why I do these, and to allow you who have done that, I got ahead of myself, to gain some different insight into the assigned text. So that's the purpose of these videos. This particular Sunday, March 3rd, 2019, we are into March. Yay, we are getting towards spring, which makes me very happy because here in my little corner of the world, it's been a crazy winter, and I'm ready for spring. But that's beside the point. This particular Sunday, March 3rd, is Transfiguration Sunday. So let's talk about that for just a little bit. Transfiguration is one of those stories and particular Sundays, as we hear, that comes around every single year. It is always the final Sunday of the season of Epiphany. We have been in Epiphany for a while now. Easter, as I've mentioned in the last couple of videos, if you've seen, Easter is about as late as it can possibly be this year. And because of the way that the whole season of the church calendar works backwards from that, Epiphany has been quite long. However, every year, as I mentioned, the last Sunday before the beginning of the season of Lent is Transfiguration Sunday, and Lent will then kick off this coming Wednesday, March 6th, with Ash Wednesday. So that's kind of what's coming up and where we've been and where we're at. So Transfiguration, what is it? Great question. Transfiguration is featured in 3 of the 4 Gospels. The 3 Synoptic Gospels all feature it, and details are pretty similar between them. There are, of course, little differences, as there usually are, but all 3 accounts of the Transfiguration are pretty similar in terms of the details that they give us. And what can we call the Transfiguration? Well, it seems to be one of those moments when the divine is shining through the human, or the finite. It, of course, centers around Jesus, and he's up a high mountain with the big 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, and something extraordinary happens. This story from the Gospels is kind of you might call it the basis for a mountaintop experience, or it's the epitome of a mountaintop experience, and yet there's some things that go on with that too. So that's kind of where we're at here in Luke's Gospel. It comes out of Luke chapter 9. Verses 28 through 36. Some churches will also include the next little portion. I'm not going to include that. It's kind of an optional extension of the reading, which I'm not going to focus in on, but it happens about midway through. And directly after this, or actually after that little extended portion, we hear that Jesus turns his face towards Jerusalem. So the ministry has happened up to this point, and then there's an extended travel narrative before he finally actually gets to Jerusalem. And I can't even tell you, I want to say that's in chapter 21, but don't quote me on that because I don't know off the top of my head. But it's an extended period when Jesus is moving towards Jerusalem and what will culminate there. And that's hinted at today in the Transfiguration. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. I've been jabbering about it long enough, and then we'll continue and kind of get into it. So again, Luke chapter 9, 28 through 36. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up a mountain to pray. While he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. I'm going to stop right there because that's a crappy translation. It really is. The appearance of his face changed. That's pretty decent. We hear that his countenance, which is his face, was changed. We actually don't have the word transfigured in the original language here. Matthew and Mark both do, but we don't have that here. But then his clothes became dazzling white. It's actually his garment flashed white like lightning, which if you've ever looked directly at lightning, it's really bright. And I can only imagine how bright it is. Side note, I'm going on side notes. You can actually see on my face right now the reflection from the window that's behind me outside. Tons and tons of snow. Even though it is a cloudy day and there is no sun right now, it's still super bright outside. And that's something that I'm really playing with in terms of how bright this must be, almost blinding, just the state of so much white in the world. And yet, okay, tangent. Now we're going to come back in. Now I'm picking up at verse 30. So he's just been transfigured. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, or exodus is actually the word, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my son, my chosen, listen to him. When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent in those days and told no one the things that they had seen. All right, so that's the end of the Transfiguration. Now what follows, I'll reference it. They go back down the mountain. And then Luke sets it actually the next day that there is a man who brings his son who's troubled by a spirit. And they try and have an exorcism, and the disciples are unable to accomplish it. So then Jesus does so. So that's kind of the thing that comes next. Matthew and Mark actually place it immediately when they come down the mountain. They come down into the crowd there, and that happens. But so that's what's next. And then there's the whole he turns his face towards Jerusalem thing. Some other thoughts about this passage. So we hear 8 days after these sayings. Well, what are the sayings that are going on? Before this, it's still in chapter 9. It's just a few verses ahead of this. We have the first passion prediction, which I've talked about in past videos before, that Jesus tells them, this is what's going to happen. We're going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to be handed over, and I'm going to be tortured, and I'm going to be killed. That's been talked about for the first time here in Luke's gospel. But then there are some other sayings as well. So that's one of the things that they've been talking about. Peter has just made his proclamation that Jesus is the Messiah, so that's been happening too. And we begin to see all of these things really kind of coalescing. Now, the Transfiguration, particularly here in Luke's Gospel, seems to be very, very much parallel to the baptism. There's a lot of similar things that are happening. In Luke's Gospel, following the baptism, as Jesus is praying, that's when the heavens open up and the Holy Spirit descends, and the voice of God declares, "This is my beloved Son," and claims him. We hear many of the same things here. Jesus goes up the mountain, he's praying, and while he's praying, that's when this stuff happens. That's when he is transfigured, and Moses and Elijah show up, and then the cloud envelops them, and out of the cloud comes this voice again that says almost the same thing. This is my son, the chosen one, listen to him. So that's going on. There's divine actions happening in the midst of the finite, which I know I've said before. But there's a lot of debate and a lot of question about what do we make of this miraculous moment, and what can we extrapolate from it? Well, that's always the big question. But I can only think that there's a glimpse of the truth is what started coming out. A glimpse of the truth of Jesus' identity. That there is more than just the man. That there is the divine, which goes beyond our ability to comprehend. Now, I can only imagine what this was like for Peter and James and John to witness and to see. We hear that for many days they told no one. Eventually, obviously, they must have told someone what had happened because we have the story. But what were they witnessing? And it probably, I can only think that it goes beyond their ability to comprehend and describe. They tried their best to describe it. So, when we say he was changed. So what's that mean? Well, we don't really know. And his clothing flashed white like lightning, or sometimes we hear it's whiter than any launderer could ever make it. Well, what's that mean? Well, I don't know. Is it brightness, or is it just utterly white, devoid of any color? I don't know. But something happened. And it really seems to point to Jesus' identity, which is confirmed by the voice of God from heaven or from the cloud. Now, they're up a mountain. I've been to the mountain where they believe this happened. one of the other gospels says it's a high mountain, and that's for sure. It's this one place that's up above a plain, and as you're going up it, holy smokes, you're up high. So they're up on this mountain, and a cloud comes over it. Well, think back to our Old Testament and Moses going up the mountain, and that's Mount Sinai, but going up the mountain into the presence of God, into the clouds that are up there. This seems to be an echo of that, definitely. And then we have Moses show up, and Elijah as well. Now, some people think, well, they're representing the law and the prophets, and now we have Jesus, who is the living Word of God, and it's all legitimate and all of this. And now, I don't know. I don't know why they're there. Are they the forerunners of Christ? Are they just? Does this just happen? I don't know. But it seems to. And we've got we hear that they're talking. Now, one unique aspect of Luke is we hear what they're talking about. They're talking about his departure in Jerusalem, or his exodus that's about to happen in Jerusalem. Now, some think this refers to the crucifixion and his death. Some think that this refers to his actual ascension, which is then 40 days after Easter and the resurrection, which Luke also places right outside of Jerusalem. So maybe it's all tied together. Whatever it is, it's coming to fulfillment. It's coming to completion. Whatever it is that God is up to through Christ, it's coming to fulfillment. And that's what they're talking about. And then, interestingly enough, directly after this, that's when Jesus turns his face towards Jerusalem. So maybe this is a moment for him, like, it's time. Maybe this is a confirmation for him, like, you know what's coming, but here we go. We don't really know. But in the midst of that, I want to circle back around. I'm kind of going all over the place here, but I want to circle back around to Peter's comment. We hear that he doesn't know what he's saying, but he says, Master, it's good for us to be here. Let's put up 3 tabernacles, is what they're called, skeno in the Greek, which are little booths or tents, tabernacles they call them. And this is kind of pointing 2 directions. It might be pointing towards the Festival of Booths, which normally goes on in Jerusalem, but that's a festival that they celebrate to remember the time wandering in the wilderness when they lived in tents. And then also it's reminiscent of wow, I'm blanking. The tabernacle itself, which is where God dwelled among the people during that time wandering in the wilderness. And so it might all be tied together, but we hear that Peter doesn't really know what he's saying. He's flabbergasted, but I love Peter because he's so human. He's always the one who spouts off and does something crazy or says something weird or whatever. He has his moments of greatness, but he also has his problems, and isn't that just human? In the end, I kind of wonder if they are silenced, like we read at the end, because there's been a little touch of a rebuke. They think, this is great, we want to stay here. Or maybe Peter's thinking, Jesus just talked recently about his destruction and his death. Well, we don't want that to happen, so let's just stay here on the mountain. This is where things are good. We want to stay here. Maybe, I don't know. But the takeaway seems to be confirmation of Jesus' identity. And I know I said that before. Now, why is that important? And why does that tie into the importance of baptism? Those are kind of the 2 big things that I'm really playing with right now. Well, because in the waters of our baptism, we are made heirs to the same promise, the same identity of Jesus. Jesus is the beloved Son. We are claimed by God as beloved children as well. So I think that's important. That regardless of what's happening, it's something that's amazing. It's something that goes beyond their ability to comprehend and describe, and yet it reveals a truth about Jesus, that Jesus is God among them. And then it reveals another truth about his identity, which we are made heirs of, that we too are beloved children. So God is among us. And that seems to be a pretty big deal. And that's maybe one step beyond what's happening here. But again, I see the parallel nature of this with the baptism and everything that goes on there. And so that's kind of the direction I'm going. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, you want to continue the conversation, throw them down in the comment section. We'll do that. And also, I started this last week and I'm going to continue. If you are a regular viewer of these videos and you find a benefit of them, You've perhaps heard me talk before that these videos that I do are an outreach of my congregation, a way that we take the gospel out into the digital realm and beyond our four walls, beyond the analog, into the digital world. So if these have been a benefit to you, and you want to be in some way support the ministry that allows me to do them, we'll put a link to our church website in the comment section, and there is a way that you can follow a link to donate digitally to the ministry of my congregation. No pressure to do that. If you don't want to, that's fine. You can continue viewing these videos, or you can never come back again, and that's up to you and perfectly okay. But if you feel led to help out and throw a few shekels our direction, it would be a blessing to us as well. So that's everything. Hope you have a great week. We will catch you next time.